Greetings and welcome to 5 new narrations done by Dr. Torment. The following stories may contain topics that might be sensitive to certain listeners. Consider that your one and final warning. Now then, let us proceed. Our first story. If the company I worked for found out I was spreading this online, I'd be canned immediately. So, to keep my anonymity intact, let's call me T. I deliver pizzas in a small rural area in northern Canada. The town I deliver in consists of about 25,000 people, spread along the foothills of a large mountain range. Many of the people who live here are farmers, loggers, and well, shit like that. And we have a small college here too. So, naturally, there are a few students from out of town living here as well. Unlike most delivery companies, the one I work for allows people outside the city limits to order pizza up to 50 kilometers away from our location. Of course, folks like this because many of the residents actually live out on the city limits on these pre-mentioned foothills where the farms are. And if you're 50 kilometers away, it'll cost an extra $20. This may seem outrageously high, but believe me, people really like their fucking pizza. Obviously, this causes me and the other drivers to be gone for long periods of time on deliveries. To top it off, we are open until 5 a.m. every night. This combination of variables has caused me to witness some really fucked up and creepy shit during my several years of working here. Now, of course, I don't know if other drivers in different parts of the world have the same issues, but here in northern Canada, there are a lot of really creepy and questionable stuff going on. I don't consider myself superstitious in any way, but some of the things I've seen, I can't explain. I often hit the bar after these long shifts, and some of my fellow drivers have seen some really messed up shit over the years. I even know a guy who keeps a lamp on the inside of his car at night because he's so terrified of the dark after something happened to him that he just won't tell anyone. Several months ago, I want to say in December, I was working a close shift and my delivery sector was mostly in the outskirts of town along these foothills and further north. Now, being December in Canada, naturally there was about 6 inches of fresh snow and only the highways and, well, artery roads are plowed properly. Driving the rest of the roads would have been a death wish if you didn't have the right gear and experience. Well, luckily for me, I have a car with studded tires and chains in case things go really south. And I'm also one of the more, experienced drivers, being one of the few people with an all-wheel drive car. I was requested to take another pizza to the edge of our delivery range. Since the weather was so shitty, I called a number on my slip to confirm the address and to check if they still wanted their pizza. Getting the okay from what seemed to be a cheerful old lady, I set out down the highway just after I left the city limits. I noticed something alarming, however. All of the lights, including the street lights, were out, and I was assuming a power outage due to the storm. Therefore, I gave my boss a call to confirm this, and of course, he did confirm that there was indeed a sector-wide power outage. A little vexed by the news, I still attempted to give the lady I'm delivering to a call. Just something simple like, "Hey, this is your delivery driver. I noticed that there was a power outage. I was wondering if you still wanted a pizza despite these terrible conditions. She said that she did, and that she had a backup generator powering her house. It'd be hard to mess up, knowing that I took a substantial tip from this lady. I put my blinker on and continued back down the highway. One thing you need to understand is just how dark it was, with it being later than midnight and not with a single light on. The only things illuminating my way were my subpar headlights. On top of that, it was snowing quite heavily. For reference, my field of vision looked exactly like this. If my car were to die or my headlights were to go out, I'd be completely and utterly fucked. About 10 kilometers down of what I could only assume was a dirt road underneath mountains and snow in the middle of nowhere, I came across a car in the middle of the road with its hazards on. The car was diagonal across the road from its tracks. I could tell it tried to suddenly stop and lost the battle. Moving about 20 meters from the car, I couldn't see any signs of life and noticed that the driver's side door was swung open and snow was piling inside the car. What alarmed me the most was what looked like blood on the inside of the window and all over the steering wheel as well. Upon clearing the snow from inside the car, it was obvious that there was a pretty brutal accident here. And with all the blood all over the driver's side, my mediocre first aid training kicked in. My first response, of course, was to call 911 to get an ambulance out here. So I pulled up my cell phone, and then the most cliché thing of all time happened. There was no fucking service. Obviously there's no fucking cell service. I thought to myself that I was out in the boonies at this point and completely forgot about the delivery. Pretty intent on helping whoever fucked up out here too. The chance of another car coming by at all, way out here, were just slim to none. So this was on me. I managed to figure out a couple of things while I was figuring things out. Firstly, the person obviously hit something really, really big, like a moose or a large bear. The front of his car was entirely caved in. Both of his front wheels were going in opposite directions. This thing wasn't going anywhere, drawing on past experiences. That is, whatever he hit. I actually couldn't think of any animal that would do that much damage to a car upon hitting it. Secondly, after seeing a small trail of blood leading up the road, I assumed he probably went walking for help. So, this is where I made my first mistake. I followed the trail of blood on foot, wanting to play the hero. I bundled up and set out into the storm with a small LED flashlight, and I was concerned with whoever had injured themselves in this accident, wanting them to get them to safety. After about 5-ish minutes of walking, I realized that I had fucked up majorly at a singular thought. And this singular thought just shot through my mind. What if whatever the driver hit is still out here? Judging by how big the impact on the car was, I can only assume it was a grizzly bear or something unknown. Something much larger. Dealing with a wounded animal, and potentially dangerous one too, in the middle of winter simply wasn't something my pay grade included. After my moment of clarity, I decided that my best bet was to get back in my car and try to get some cell service back to call 911. Not even after I had taken 10 steps back towards my car, I heard what sounded like an entire tree being torn from the ground. The noise was absolutely deafening and threw me into a wild panic, and I started sprinting back toward my car, but kept getting slowed down by the fact that my legs wouldn't coordinate with each other. What did you expect with all this snow around? After sprinting about 5 steps, I tripped face first into a snowbank and just laid there. Just as I was about to get up again, I heard what sounded like heavy breathing from just out my visual range. The noise was coming from where the accident happened and where my car was at this point. Something felt terribly, terribly wrong. That labored breathing sounded more animal than human and was far too loud for any human to make. Laying there in the snow, it felt like an eternity. The breathing got louder until suddenly I saw whatever was making that terrible, terrible noise. It had to be standing at a minimum 8 feet tall. Yeah, it was fucking standing. It was running on 2 feet, but every couple of steps it would stumble and start running like a bear on 4 legs. Were it not for the snow, I'd say it was, well, galloping really, but then it would just get back up on 2 feet and started running again. It was almost entirely covered in thick white fur, and would have been almost impossible to spot had it not been covered in blood. Whether or not it was the driver's blood or its own, I never stuck around to find out. Nor did I want it even to know what this thing was. The beast seemed too distracted to see me and sprinted right past me down the middle of the road, still breathing as heavy. After what I thought was a solid 10 minutes, I forced myself out of the snowbank and just sprinted to my car. When I got back to the vehicle, all 4 of my doors were wide open and the pizza boxes were strewn all over the road. Not even thinking about a pizza or the delivery, I drove straight to the police station to report what had happened. And officially, the police report states that the driver of the car collided with a large bear, and that this bear must have dragged him back into the woods just to devour him. They never found his full body, but did find what appeared to be a portion of their spine, almost 80 kilometers from where the accident happened. It was a really big thing in our town. People spent weeks searching for the body and for the beast. Whatever it was that the driver hit, it's still out there. If you guys enjoyed this, I could probably get together with some of the other drivers and get some stories out of them for a few bruises. And if not, I have a few other really fucked up stories I'm willing to share with you. Either way, tip your drivers. Our second story. I'm the sort of person who is skeptical about any claims regarding the existence of the paranormal. My wife claims to see ghosts, saying that she's an empath. Sure, I'll concede that she's a very good listener regarding other people's emotions, history of places and families, but I can't accept her statements as fact because empirically it cannot be proven. And with that said, you can believe me or not, but what I'm about to say is something that even I have a lot of trouble disbelieving. I can't say I've had any supernatural experiences in my life, but there are several things that happened when I was quite young that I simply can't explain. Going as far back since I was 18 months old, I either had a memory or a very vivid imagination of my life before birth. I was floating up into the sky with no land in any direct way. In front of me was a kindly middle-aged Native American man wearing a plain white robe. He asked me if I was ready, and when I said yes, I somehow descended and experienced my own birth. I know this all sounds crazy, And, well, I guess it could all be chalked up to me having a dream. But as I got older, things got weirder when I was about 6 or 7 years of age. I started getting very distinct mental images of something extremely disturbing. What I saw was a tanned, mummified-looking, emaciated, dead face. The eyes were glassy, but somehow horribly alive, and the lips and nose were shrunken. The creepiest thing about the face was the far too wide smile and a full set of very white teeth. Then, when I was 9 or 10, I read for the first time about an expedition in Antarctica where several members of an expeditionary group died and were left behind, their bodies only discovered in the 20th century. The article I was reading had images of them. I had never seen a frozen body before, but as soon as I saw those pictures, I immediately correlated what I was reading with the thing that I saw in those mental images earlier in my life from that point onwards, and I started having almost real waking visions of something that was basically my worst nightmare. It's hard to explain, more than just in my mind's eye, and yet not exactly, as if they were actually in front of me. It was an 8 or 9 foot tall, frozen corpse, completely naked, with long arms and legs. It had the same face as the thing I'd seen before, with shrunken features, only now upon a full body, just as emaciated and mummified as their head and neck. I only ever saw it on cloudy days in the late fall or winter, and always when it was between me and a window. So it was sort of backlit at least. It never made any motion, or, well, anything. It just stared down at me with that horrible grin. I finally learned what this thing was, the Wendigo. For those of you who do not know, it's a mythical spirit creature in Algonquian legend. I was born in Connecticut and have about 1% of Native American blood in me from 400 years ago. My first traceable ancestors in America came over shortly after the Mayflower landed. And, as you may have guessed, one of them married a Native American woman. According to legend, the Wendigo was an evil spirit associated with starvation, the winter, and cannibalism. It would have been drawn towards either the desperate people into eating their fellow humans during the winter time, or outright possessed those who did retort to cannibalism. There are various stories about how the Wendigo looked, but most agree that it looks like a frozen corpse, generally taller than a normal human. And no, it doesn't have antlers, like all those pictures you find via Google search. Well, mine doesn't at least. It can reportedly mimic human voices to lure the unwary away. Here's the thing. I experienced this before I even identified what the creature was or knew anything about the legends. Only after well over a decade of initially seeing this Wendigo did I come across the description of what it looked like. I've done some further research, and all of the information I found from various sources, they all concur with what I saw. So I'm remotely linked to the Native Americans with whom the legend originated, and I've always had a deathly fear of dead bodies, especially mummified looking ones. And I saw a creature from their stories long before I learned what I saw matched their traditional descriptions perfectly. I was, and still am, skeptical, but even I can't ignore these coincidences. I'm also Christian, and therefore I'm quite aware of claims regarding ghosts or the supernatural, but even so, this thing, it's been stuck with me for years. I saw it earlier today, which is why I'm relaying this now. Does anyone else have any insights? I've considered seeking out a highly knowledgeable Algonquian person so I can figure out what to do, but I'm torn because I also have some reservations about that from a religious perspective. I promise this story is sincere. It sounds pretty fantastical, even to me. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just my imagination. Our third story. Years ago, on a sunny autumn day, me and my girlfriend were hiking in a very isolated area. But then we were discovered that we were being stalked. It was late in the day, mind you, not even dark yet. But the path ahead was with heavy woods on either side. In these woods we could hear movement. The sound of cracking leaves, snapping branches, all the while behind us. They seemed parallel to our own path and matched our own movements. However, we couldn't see what was trailing us. Therefore we tested it. We stopped walking just to listen, and the noise, it stopped as well. Start and stop, start and stop, start and stopping again, and it would just keep matching our movements. And I left my girlfriend on the path, walking towards the noise, and I saw something that, to this very day, I just can't explain. When I saw it, it hid behind a tree and quickly ran away. It was probably about 30 feet away from me when it took off. Some vague humanoid shape, an extremely tall and thin thing. I've always described it as almost skeletal to others. It was pale white, quite emaciated as well, standing about 7 foot tall or more. It ran away very quickly, which is why it's a good thing I was paralyzed with fear after seeing it. After a minute I got my wits back a little and went back to my girlfriend. Luckily, we didn't have far to go, and that's a true story. And it made me realize there are some very unexplainable things in this world. Number 4. This took place in 2008 in northern Ohio. My cousin invited me to some camping trip in a hidden state park, and I happily agreed because, hey, Ohio has to be better than Indiana, right? So, I drove over to their house, we packed up our stuff, tent, food and the like, and we head out in this truck for a few hours into the boondock. After miles of twists and turns, the road started getting bumpy. It woke me up and I noticed that we were off the grid on some dirt roads. We parked the truck and head up into the hills for a couple of miles and made a base camp on the top of a hill, overlooking a valley with thick trees on the edge, across from us. Nightfall comes fast in these parts, and around 1 a.m. or so, we were sitting around a fire, and I asked what the name of the park was. My cousins broke out into laughter and said that it was not a park, but native land upon a sacred hill, a hill they, at the time, called bullshit. But they named a tribe, which, also at the time, sounded legit enough to me, so I didn't really argue against it. A few minutes later, we all heard this scream, a scream that drifted across the hills and right into our bones. We all grew up hunting together, and we have been around the country. We have heard our fair share of animal calls and howls, and none of us could agree upon what this particular sound was. If anything, I'd say it was a screaming fox, but much deeper and like a wolf because of how it carried. This goes on for a few more times, mind you. And whatever laughter we had quickly dissipated, and we became uneasy as it seemed to be getting closer. The fifth scream sounded like it was coming from down in the valley. So we all had a look over in that direction. And that's where we saw it. Out from the fucking tree line. There it was. At first we thought it was a man. A gangly, thin man. But even from afar, far too tall to be a human. Suddenly, this thing takes off in a sprint on its two legs, right at us. And without hesitation, all three of us just ran off the hill behind us, entered the woods and towards the car. As we reached the bottom of the hill, we heard the scream again, this time from where the camp was. After the fastest 2 miles in my life, we get in the truck and floor it off the land. We entered the nearest McDonald's we could find, and we stayed there until sunrise. As the sun rose, we agreed to go back to grab our things at the campsite. To our surprise, nothing had been moved or taken. We drove back to my uncle's where we tried to joke about it and just move on from this shit. It didn't really bother me until I looked up Wendigo online, and I became uneasy because it looked just like what we saw in the woods that night. This shit's real, and it is still prowling out there. Our fifth and final story. A few days ago, I was walking around the land near my home. It's a big field with 2 large hills and a plateau on top of both of them. It was around dusk, so the sun had just set, but the moon wasn't out yet. Upon walking between the valley of sorts between the 2 hills, I saw something peculiar. A white, featureless human head about 200 feet away from me. The head itself was about 4 feet off the ground, and from what I could tell, it was pacing back and forth. It sounded like a horse when it walked. And when I went to pull out my flashlight, it growled at me, and I immediately ran home, deciding I didn't want anything to do with it. Today a friend came over, so we decided to investigate during the daylight hours. We couldn't really find anything conclusive, but we did find some creepy things. Weird howling and laughter like that of a child. I thought it sounded like some skulking kid, to be honest. And the birds weren't flying right. Something kept watching us from the trees. Again, we heard the sound of hooves. My friend said that she could smell sulfur, but I couldn't smell a thing. But the inside of my nose was burning. We took some photos of what we found in the area. The first 3 things of what we saw, they looked like some form of graves. That's the best I could describe it. And the last one, more like an effigy of anything, but those were all over the place. Some even looked like they had been burned. If someone could help me out by sharing information of what you think this was, I'd really appreciate it. It's been watching me for days now. And with that, our session has concluded. With this, I would also like to take a moment to thank all of you sweet wicked people for joining me in this narration. Do you desire more? Then tickle the bell icon and like this video, and of course do leave a comment behind with your thoughts. Lastly, for those willing, consider joining us on our Patreon page and help support the channel yourself personally with all the added benefits therein. This was Dr. Torment bidding you adieu, and remember, don't fall asleep ever.